Well, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 60 of the podcast. I don't remember what episode we're on. I've gotten kind of lax in my episode tracking. I think it's 65, but it might be 66. So I'm not sure. But as we mentioned on last week's episode, Pastor JB is traveling today. He left right after service. He's got a business trip that he's got to go on. So I decided to bring in a very special guest. I'm sorry, Chris Kidd, you will now no longer be my favorite podcast co-host.
No pressure. Oh boy.
Because I have my wife, Nicole, here with me.
Hello.
So,
hi, I'm Nicole. Nicole Harima. We have the same last name.
We do. It works out really well that way.
Yeah.
But we're here coming to you, not live, but we're coming to you from my friend's house. They've graciously allowed us to use the space. So we're just mixing everything up today. We don't have coffee because we didn't make coffee. JB's not here. We're not in the studio. We're not in our normal fill-in spot. So we're just like shake, rattle, and roll this.
Which honestly, I think it's kind of fun because this actually reminds me when Joshua was in college. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into your podcast, guys. When he was in college, he had to interview me, and so this kind of actually feels like that. So we have like this old video where I'm like super pregnant. Remember, I'm wearing like a red shirt and I've got bangs, and he was just like he had to learn how to practice active listening, and so. It kind of brings me back to that.
So my schooling, all of my college stuff was in healthcare. So I went for occupational therapy, and I had various therapeutic intervention classes. And for a lot of those, you've got to look at kind of interviewing styles, active listening, all of these different things. They wanted to actually see you demonstrate this. So we had to shoot some videos. But go back even further. Right, go back to our teenage years, and it was actually Nicole. People often don't believe me when I tell them that I am an introvert. I am, and I would say an extreme introvert when I was a teenager. And back in the day when people would talk on the telephone as kind of a primary means of communication, Nicole and I, when we were first getting to really kind of showing interest in each other, we would have phone calls with one another. And I was not very good at those. And I remember one time, like we're on the phone, and Nicole says, "All right, hey, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to say something to you and ask a question. That's like me passing you a ball, right? And then you say something back, right? And you ask me a question. That's like you throwing the ball back to me." And this is essentially how I learned to have a conversation.
Oh, yeah. So like, I love how actually Pastor Ryan brought that up in service today about how he grew up with the purity culture, which is something that we also grew up with. So my parents, were really into that. So I actually wasn't even allowed to call a boy, which is so hard for me because I love people and I love talking. And so I kind of like had to almost go through the grapevine to get Joshua, someone to tap on his shoulder to be like, "Hey, Nicole really wants you to call her." So it was after a missions trip. We went on a missions trip to Chile in Santiago, and we really connected there. And anyway, so I just really wanted to call him after that because I was like, "Oh, he's so cool," but I couldn't because of that culture that we grew up, very similar to Pastor Ryan. And so when he finally did call, I was so ecstatic, and I'd be like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he'd be like, "Fine," and I'm like, "Okay, what'd you do today?" Nothing. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And so
give me more information.
I need something to go on. So then I just kind of got this analogy about bouncing a ball back and forth, and that really seemed to take root. And now we can talk for quite a long time, obviously, so it's fun.
Yeah, we got to the point where Pastor JB and I we decided last time we're going to be very disciplined and keep our episodes to an hour, although I don't have a timer running now. You just have to watch your watch. What, 2 minutes ago we started?
Sure.
So that'll be kind of our gauge there, trying to make sure that we're not going overly long. But I'm super excited to have my wife Nicole on the episode. It's going to be good. And it's kind of cool. It's fitting, right, that we're talking about the second installment in our ER series, Emotionally Healthy, Holy Relationships. And today's whole topic was about the elephant in the room. How do we deal with the elephant in the room? Before we get kind of in the weeds, just knee-jerk reaction, what are one or two things that just grabbed your attention in the message today?
Well, I mean, there were so many different things that I felt like, oh man, I could just totally dive into this and I could dive into that. Even just being able to, how do you develop good communication? Because I agree with what Rasika was saying and some of her, why we wouldn't want to have these hard conversations. Fear, I think, is a big one. Like, I really don't like conflict. I don't, that's really hard for me to go into. But I also really feel like being able to say the hard things with truth and grace is just critical. We've had so many conversations that everything that he would bring up, I'd be like, oh my goodness, this could be like a fix and listen or support conversation.
We'll have to get into that.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that because that's a really good tool to use. Or even, how am I coming across? Because sometimes when I know that I have to have hard conversations, especially with you, I'd be like, all right, here's the elephant in the room that we need to address. And then I don't know for sure if I'm being received right or, I'm passionate about it, because obviously our relationship and our communication, like all of our life, it matters so much. So I rise passionately, but I know sometimes you've said that it feels like an attack,
Well, and some of it, right? So temperament-wise, personality, I do think that plays into some of this, right? But you're sanguine, right? You're more bubbly, right? You tend to process things out loud.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm a melancholic, I process internally. So sometimes, and this has been a really cool aspect of learning about temperament theory, the I said this, you heard that, and incorporating that is not being somebody who typically processes out loud. I will usually speak once I've kind of arrived at a more refined or kind of final version. So it can be easy for me to hear you thinking out loud, and I assume, oh, well, that must be your final version.
Right, we're
and I don't think I like that final version. Versus she's doing externally what I've done internally, right? And this isn't her conclusion. This is just part of her process of working through the issue.
Yeah. So I really love that. I really love that. We have done a lot to develop this communication style, starting all the way back when we were younger to, even now we're still working at it. Marriage retreats were just, I know, so big in us learning how to talk about those things and just develop those different tools. I love that you brought up counseling. That's been such a big helpful thing because I know my bandwidth isn't very big, and so if I get to listen to a podcast, I am super pumped. Read a whole book. I'm crazy dyslexic, so it takes me 1,000 years to read a book, which is why I love Audible.
They say Audible is our friend. Right?
Yes, and I probably just said that wrong, but anyway, words are my friend, and so anyway, as we're doing these things, I was like, it's definitely worth it to me to go ask somebody else who can read all the books really fast, who have all the nuggets and can just kind of pour into me. Here's the problem. How do I fix it? And then we kind of just go from there. And I think for both of us, we've found a lot of healing through that. So Pastor Ryan talked about, being self-aware. That I think counseling really helps you go into a safe place where they teach you how to become self-aware, and then they can just gently guide you to those areas that, maybe those elephants that you don't even see, how he was saying, Katie helped him find those things in his own life that he wasn't able to see, but she did it with, truth and grace. And
then another piece of that is the awareness of how I respond to those things. When I have blinders on for something, right, and you bring something to my attention, the awareness of how I respond. Because, oftentimes when we respond to those things, and this has been true in different seasons of our marriage, right? You bring something to me and I don't always respond very well.
Yeah.
And so learning to have the self-awareness to realize like, okay, she brought this to me. The way that I'm responding, I'm actually making this worse by the way that I'm responding. So developing that self-awareness, I think, is really crucial. Just the awareness of your own emotional temperature. And that was a huge win for us. I would say for me in particular, going through counseling when we first went is really developing a vocabulary for emotions. Yeah. I would say I didn't really have it. It's like, well, how are you feeling? I don't know. Like I don't know how to articulate the things that I'm experiencing on an emotional level. So that was a huge part of that counseling journey for me.
Well, because a lot of things, like someone will ask, how are you doing? And we had to change that to how are you feeling? Because, and then we had to learn those feeling words, because it's a lot harder to address things in our relationship, not having the right vocabulary for it, So like I would say, like, how are you doing? And he would say, oh, I'm tired. I'm, got 5,000 things going on.
Right, I'm busy. I feel
I'm
like
busy.
I'm busy.
But that doesn't communicate anything to me, because I could say like, hey, is it a good tired or a bad tired? Because Joshua loves being productive. So if it's a good tired, it's because like, yeah, I just accomplished a lot. I'm tired, but things are going well. I'm super busy. I could see that as, okay, are you stressed out, or are you feeling like on top of the moon?
Like I'm motivated. I've got purpose. I've got all these things. And at the end of the day, like busy isn't an emotion.
No.
So if she's asking how I'm feeling, I'm like, oh, I'm busy.
That's not an emotion.
That's not an emotion. That's a fact. Right? Like that's a statement about how I'm perceiving things, but it's not actually an emotion.
Right.
So learning how to actually engage with our emotions that's been a huge part of kind of our journey that has contributed in I think a helpful way to those situations where there's an elephant in the room and one of us has to address this thing. Because if I'm in a place where I'm not emotionally healthy, the way that we navigate this elephant will probably be limited, if not totally, kind of a train wreck.
Yeah.
So
well, and I've talked about that. Like I've learned a lot about like how does one become emotionally healthy? Like how can I get myself into a place, kind of going back to the teaching, like inwardly, how do I fix, this potential unsteadiness? And I really loved, like I had listened to a podcast and they had talked about what emotionally healthy people look like. And they would give different scenarios like, okay, emotionally healthy is somebody who is receptive versus reactive. And so when somebody brings something to you that's like, hey, this was really hard for me, our natural response is to be like, well, yeah, you did this and you did that. And that's a reactive response. That's not a healthy response.
And it's deflecting. It's like a victim mentality. It's blame. Like we're called to the carpet for something when unfortunately, I've done this.
You still trip up sometimes.
I mean, like something is brought to my attention of some elephant in the room that has to be dealt with. And if I spin it and turn around, well, did you know what you did? We're missing it.
Right. Because then that reactive explosion is, like if I'm coming to Joshua to share my heart, to say like, hey, this thing we got to work through. And once we do, we're going to be better for it. But if he's saying, well, no, and he dismisses it, it's almost like he's also dismissing me. And then it's really easy to be hurt and be broken and be like, you were my safe place. And in my safe place, instead of being receptive, hey, thank you for telling me that. It's hard to hear, and it is upsetting for me because he's allowed to have an emotional response after I've emotionally charged him. Then it's like, well, now we can be productive. Hey, thanks for letting me know what this is. Let's work through it now. And sometimes, like Joshua said, like we haven't always done a good job of that. Like sometimes I'll bring up an elephant or he'll bring up an elephant, and then we go back to our I feel like our natural, like probably nature response of being like,
broken Eden. Yeah.
Oh yeah? Well, guess what? You didn't do this right and you didn't do that right. Instead of just focusing at the problem at hand. we get so distracted with just wanting to be justified, and no, that's not true.
Well, and then it just escalates. Like, I mean, we make the elephant bigger.
Yeah.
Right? So if Nicole comes to me and says, "Hey, like, here's an elephant," I'm like, "No, well, here's your elephant," and she's like, "Well, no, your elephant." I'm like, "No." Like, our elephants are like, they're duking it out,
Right.
And that's not helpful.
And sometimes again we've had that. So I remember one night Josh and I we were dressing one of our elephants or whatever, and honestly I literally like take a break and I go to the, I'm just gonna say it, I went to the bathroom and I'm just like sitting on the toilet praying to Jesus.
It's a good place to pray.
I mean, some people feel closest to Jesus when they're in the shower. I mean, anywhere you can talk, you can have a conversation with the Father. The Heavenly Father will always answer. So, you can be that close. And so I was just sitting on the toilet, and Joshua and I just had a fight or whatever, and I was just praying. I was like, Lord, help me to just do these things, and help me to know what to do here. And I remember the Father just saying so lovingly and gently and gracefully, that's how I know the Father talks to me. That's not how he talks to everybody, but I just know for me, that's how he responds to me. It's very loving and kind. And he's like, Nicole, here's a question I wanna point out for you. This fight would normally trip up a rookie, but you and Josh, you guys are vets now. You've been together for a while. And I know we haven't been together as long as some of some more mature.
Yeah, we're not saying we're experts. This June will be 17 years being married.
Right.
We've known each other since you were 12. I mean, so we've got a long history. And again, we're not claiming we're experts, but
No.
17 years in, hopefully we've figured a couple of things out.
And so like normally this would shut me down. Like if we had a conflict, my natural response is to withdraw, to shut down, to close off, space out, and I'm not saying there isn't time for that, but in this specific instant, I was like, Nicole, do I want to respond like a rookie, or do I want to respond like a vet? And a vet would get back in there and go have an amazing conversation. And then what did Ryan talk about?
Consummate the marriage.
Go get it done. And I'm just saying, and so it was just this divine appointment where God just seriously shows up. So I go back in there, we go figure out our conversation, and we get it done. And it was just great. So now we have this conversation.
We use the rookie or the vet, which at some point, again, we're not experts.
No.
One of the things that we have found a theme, kind of as we've grown and learned a lot of things the hard way, right, in marriage, is we rely heavily on questions.
Yes.
Again, not an expert, but I want at some point to sit down with Nicole and actually write a book based on the questions. And we might tap into a few of those here today. But that's one of them. Like, hey, is this how a vet would respond to that? Like, come on, you gonna let this
Right.
little thing trip you up?
Right. Am I going to shut down or am I going to show up?
No, it brings me back, and this is a practice that we incorporated early on in marriage. It got brought up in our premarital, and it was a tool that we utilized pretty regularly for a while in marriage. We haven't anymore. Some of that is because we've kind of developed some of those grooves and know how to do it more on the fly. But the practice, and I'm pretty sure we took this from Les and Leslie Parrott's material, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. It's called Sharing with Holds.
Yeah.
Sharing with Holds. And this is kind of a micro version of addressing elephants in the room. What this practice is once a week or once a day. I mean, whatever, you find your rhythm. But you actually sit down with your spouse. You could do this in a friendship. You could do this in a workplace environment. Again, we utilized it in the context of marriage. But man, maybe you run your own company or you run a team at work. This could be an interesting thing to incorporate in those relationships. But the way that it works is we sit down and you bring up to the person kind of a predetermined number of things. So let's say 3. We always did 3.
Yeah, seemed like a good number.
I'm going to bring up 3 things from the last week that you did that I appreciated.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna bring these things to you. I haven't said anything up until this point. But I say, man, over this last week, what are some things Nicole has done that I haven't expressed appreciation for? And I bring those to her. And the only thing she is allowed to say in response is thank you. Thank you. And now you transition, and you can flip-flop these if you want to end on a positive note or whatever. But now you move into the piece where you look over the last week, and what are 3 things that happened that frustrated you? Hey, you know what? Nicole comes to me and she says, I was frustrated, like...
Folding towels.
Right. That was our first fight was about folding towels. And so maybe she comes to me and says, hey, we had this conversation about towels. They were still folded incorrectly, and I was frustrated by that. The only thing I'm allowed to say in return is thank you. Right? So this is a way to bring some of those little irritations that over time, right, if we let little irritations go long enough, they become a pretty big elephant.
Yeah.
Right? If we constantly like we just grit in our teeth, like over time, those things can build up, and it becomes a pretty significant barrier to emotionally healthy connection. Again, roll this out in your workplace. Maybe you lead a team, and you say, all right, hey guys, once a week, man, what are things that you appreciated about each other or about me as a leader? What are things that frustrated you over this last week in our line of work that I contributed to or whatnot? And the only thing you're allowed to say in response is thank you. Now, some of it might spark necessary conversation down the road, and you're like, oh man, there are some themes here. Maybe we've got to address some of this and equip it, right? But in that moment, it's not time to say, well, if you knew everything. No. Thank you.
Well, and I love that kind of that angle too, because sometimes it's like we have to go to the person about the elephant. But if you create this culture of self-awareness by asking those kind of questions, no matter what relationship or situation you're in, be it family, friends, or business, you could already establish a safety way for them to come to you with those things that you might not be aware of. So by saying, like, if you are, let's say, a boss and you're like, hey, how are we doing as a team? How am I doing as a leader? I mean, that definitely brings a high level of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Pastor Ryan even talked about that. Anytime you start addressing elephants in the room, there is definitely a high level of vulnerability. But I feel like the more emotionally healthy we can get by, staying calm in those situations, when somebody does bring something really heavy to you, or even inviting that something really heavy in, that's like next level. It is remembering the heart behind the action. Not everybody is always going to be able to come to you calmly. The goal is to come with truth and grace, but let's be honest, it doesn't always come out with truth and grace, and then you got this elephant, and now you want to get into this like fist fight. But if you're inviting it in, remembering the heart behind the action is critical. Like Ryan, he knew Katie's heart, and so he remembered that through the hard thing that they had to look at. And I think really we can do that in any real situation. If we can remember the heart behind the action or the irritation, like that's going to take us so much further in being receptive instead of just being reactive and being like, I'm shutting you down.
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to the idea of cultivating curiosity.
Yeah.
Because if this is a person that I would otherwise, and it won't always be, right? I get that. But if this is a person who, otherwise, I would normally, I think this person is pretty cool. I trust this person. I've got some level of respect for this person. If they come to me with something, and it kind of, I'm shocked a little bit, but if I can kind of remain curious and go, okay, well, this person that I know and love and respect or care for, I wonder what is happening that this is kind of how they're experiencing me. Maybe there's something to that, right? Rather than hey, normally I love and trust you, but you say anything bad about me, it's, we're going to fight.
Right.
That's not an emotionally healthy response. It's understandable, right? We do that. We want to protect our own self-image. Sometimes it's pride, ego, whatever. There can be a variety of reasons. But yeah, we have to be willing to just ask that question. What if they're right? You know what I mean? And allow for that curiosity. I'm going to quick peek, make sure it's still recording.
Okay.
That
sounds good.
I got paranoid since that one time it stopped. Okay, I
Okay.
think we're still
We're
good.
still going? Okay.
So I do want to circle back though.
Yeah.
You hit on something early on, and you talked about how you really don't like conflict.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna guess there are quite a few people out there that are in that same boat, and that is a significant barrier to them addressing some of these elephants. They don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
For you, what is it that makes you want to avoid conflict?
Well, after doing a lot of like self-health, I guess, mental health, I've done a lot to invest into into my soul, but also into my mental health. And so through that process, I think I was able to really establish something inside myself that I realized that I have an underlying fear that I will lose the relationship. That I have a fear of maybe even like abandonment is a different way to say that. And then I ask those questions, I'm always feeling that a little bit, like the stronger I root into Jesus and keep my eyes on him, the less that really plays in. But honestly, that insecurity is still there. And so I think for me, one of the reasons I don't like having conflict is because I get really worried that the friendship or the relationship will be changed or will be over, or I will be dismissed and never talked to again. And so there's a real fear there. And I think also that's why I use a lot of words, because I want to be so careful in the way that I say things, because you don't want to say it wrong and then all of a sudden they're like, well, that's a bummer. I'm glad I'm not friends with her anymore. But yeah, so I think for me the conflict is I value the person and the relationship so much. I don't want to lose it. And I know Rasika kind of brought a point to that by saying, but if you don't have that, then do you really care about that person? And actually it's been great because, as we've had, kids and then you get to know other moms and you start talking about, kids, and then the kids start fighting. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to go tell my friend that little Johnny just bit my daughter, and I don't want to do that because that means our friendship might be over. So it escalates really, really high. So I think one of the things in conflict can just be even those lies of the enemy just stacking up against you to give you all the reasons not to do that. But then I go talk to my friend about little Johnny biting our daughter, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Please tell me because I want to know so I can go fix little Johnny's behavior or whatever.
So rip little Johnny's teeth out. No.
No. But anyway, so yeah, so I think there's definitely that. And then the more that, you do feel it, I think Ryan had a slide on there talking about like the stress of that. I can't remember.
Yeah. So, I mean, we will often avoid addressing the elephant because like it stresses us out. Kind of like you're saying,
oh, yeah,
this idea of
yeah.
engaging in that, it's a confrontation in a sense, but we usually don't realize that by not bringing that up, we're actually suffering a lot more and a lot longer, right? He talked about that idea of like we multiply and prolong the suffering.
Yeah.
Right? By not addressing this thing, we're not making it better, right? Like we're actually making it worse.
Yeah.
And we're making it a lot harder on ourselves. We're creating even more tension a lot of the times in these relationships than if we would just go and have this, rip the Band-Aid off kind of a conversation. And instead we let things fester and get all nasty.
And I remember you talking about that. I don't know where this all originated from, but saying like 90% of the time our conversations are great. 10% of the time they're going to be uncomfortable for both you and me. And I love that kind of language, because then it's kind of like, okay, we need to have a 10% conversation. And then you kind of both go into it like not ready to be like, let's go. But like, okay, I got to put myself in a good place in one sense, And I love how he talked about that, because one of the things I learned through mind management with confrontation and knowing that you have to address this elephant in the room is you want to just push it away because you think, oh, that's going to, help me long term. But one of the things I've been learning is that when you have a trauma happen in your life, maybe somebody really offends you, like, okay, I say trauma, like there's some like major traumas, right? I'm talking about like little ones where, you know, somebody says something to you at work and you're like, oh man, that just came out really wrong. Or there was just a certain behavior that happened and you were just offended. Well, then what happens is your mind kind of jumps in and starts putting up like these little like protective parts that try and protect you. And one of the things that they try and do is exile pain. And so it's really been interesting as I've been learning these kind of mind management techniques of being like, okay, we don't want to exile all of these emotions because, like Pastor Ryan said, that will create a multiplication of problems.
That makes it worse.
Down the road. And it takes a lot of intentionality to actually, first of all, be self-aware that, hey, I had this hurt, you know, at work or at home when you said this thing to me. And then to actually address it with the person, you know. And one of the things I really love that we've done after addressing an elephant in the room is going back and asking, how can we do this better next time? And I feel like that's been just so helpful in our relationship because having, you know, established rules for fighting, like once we handle a situation, one of the rules that we have is you don't go back and dredge it up, you know, like, hey, remember all those elephants that you had like 17 years ago?
Got a whole freaking zoo.
Right. No. We already took care of those. They're fed, they're taken care of, we're fine.
We shot those elephants and mounted their heads on the wall.
All right, they're fine. We're good.
I'm sure that's illegal.
Yeah, I don't think we should do that. But anyway, and so when we fight, when we come to these conflicts, we stick with the one at hand. We don't go back to 17 years ago and bring up all of those old ones that we've already dealt with. We've already dealt with those. And so we stay present. But then we also sometimes have to take a break and then come back a little bit later to have those conversations. Because one of the things that I remember, I don't know if this was when we were just really young, when they talked about, you know, don't go to bed angry. You know, and I know that comes from, I don't remember what scripture it comes from, but so we used to stay up like super, super late at night, you know, trying to tackle this elephant. It was not always productive or helpful. So we've learned since then that, hey, if it's getting too late and we're not getting anywhere, like literally sometimes our bodies literally just need to sleep or maybe need food. And then we'll be able to hash it out better.
Yeah, I mean, Pastor JD has talked about this, the idea of the pillars. Again, he goes to 3, I go with 5. But regardless, physical is one of these things. Right? If my physical health, you know, fatigue, hunger, you know, any of these different things, if that's not in a great space, that's going to affect the other things. Right? If I'm dog tired and, you know, we're like, oh man, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, but we haven't like hashed this out yet. Like, we should probably just keep going. Right? No. Like, this is not going to be a productive kind of conversation that we're going to have because I'm all kinds of out of balance.
So then what we'll do is we'll say, okay, hey, let's, like one of us calls like white flag and says, hey, let's reschedule this for tomorrow morning after breakfast, or hey, after I get out of work, let's revisit this. You know, and by then we have had time to pray about this elephant. We've had time to brainstorm this elephant. A lot of times when we come back together, Holy Spirit unifies our efforts, which is like so cool. So one of the things that we do too after looking at that is sometimes we will go back through the fight when we're both calm and we'll talk about how can we do better next time. You know, and the reason we revisit it is not to rehash it and rework up everything, because I think there's a productive way to do that and definitely not a productive way to do that. But when you do it in this healthy way, I think it really can help you learn from your past experiences. So that way you do better next time, you know, because you do have that advantage of, you know, looking back and being like, oh yeah, well, I could have done that a little bit better, you know, but I'm making a mental note so that way going forward, I can hopefully do this better.
No, that's good. That's good. Looking through my notes. What else kind of jumped out to you from this message? I didn't peek at your watch. Just make sure we're.
Oh yeah, how we're doing. Oh my goodness, let me just quick glance down at the thing. I love the story of King David. Pastor Ryan, like he's taught on this story many times, and I've really dug into it. And I guess in one sense I get hope from it. Like if King David could do all of these horrible things.
He was a really crappy dad. I mean, he was not a good father.
No.
From what we see in Scripture.
No, he didn't really. It's like almost like he didn't know how to be. But anyway, so I get hope in one sense, because like if he can mess up that bad, there's definitely still hope for me. That our Heavenly Father still loves us and will help us through the hard things. But I did find it super interesting how, like, his son, Absalom, gets really upset because Pastor Ryan talks about King David and the story of Bathsheba. And so, King David was supposed to be off to war during this time, because during this season, this is when all the kings go off to war. And for whatever reason, King David stays back. And I think it's kind of cool because that actually brings up a prayer that I've prayed many times and try to pray every single day. Lord, help me to be in the right place at the right time and do and say the right things. And man, David even had that kind of a prayer, back then or whatnot. Maybe he would have been off where he was supposed to be. I think it's also a testament to like his team in one sense, because his team was doing his job for him while he was spiraling or whatever he was doing. So then he goes and sees Bathsheba on the roof, the roof bathing. And then, he ends up summoning her to come to him. They have an affair. And she gets pregnant, and then her husband is an honorable man, so he tries to get sneaky and brings her husband to like home from war. But her husband was like, "No, dude, we're supposed to be out like in war."
Right, he had honor where David didn't. Like Uriah is like, "Hey, my place is out there in battle," which I mean. David's place was supposed to be out there in battle.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's not going to go home and be with his wife when all of his fellow soldiers are out still in the trenches,
Right. So David could not trick, Bathsheba's husband to be with her, so it would look like their baby. So then he goes the next step and has him killed, which is just a super sad story because obviously she gets pregnant, and part of that whole process is that she loses their son, and anyway, he just makes a lot of mistakes in that process. But it just reminded me of like how important it is for us every single day to be praying those prayers of, Lord, help me to be in the right place at the right time and do and say the right thing. But it also helped bring to mind how important each one of our jobs really are. It's so easy for us to like downplay what we're doing, and it kind of like shined this light, like while Pastor Ryan was talking about, hey, if David was in the right place because he had certain responsibilities. He talked about that, how he had certain duties that would put him where he needed to be. And I think about my life, I'm not a business owner. I'm not, like employed anywhere other than the kingdom of God. I think that counts. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And so often I think, man, is staying at home, folding laundry, really building God's kingdom, is doing the dishes one more time, really doing anything, and it can feel a little daunting of being like, ugh. But when you look at it through this lens, I am where I'm supposed to be. I am in the right place at the right time, doing the right things. And I used to look at that so differently, and it's still a struggle for me because sometimes, I just want to go out there and do my thing, But But how each one of our roles, no matter where you are, like that is your mission field, and God has called you there. I mean, unless he's calling you somewhere else and you're not listening, for the most part, I feel like most of us are where we need to be. And so just being really aware of how are we handling that well? How are we doing the job that God has given us? How are we doing that well? If King David were asking those questions, he might not be there.
Because he was a serial avoider of the elephants in the room, right? Like even, when it comes time in Absalom, and Pastor Ryan alluded to this, right? When Absalom is basically in a position where he's going to take over the kingdom, some people, and so there's some debate on this, some people would look at this and say, oh, look, man, David didn't dare raise a hand because he says, hey, well, if this is what God wants, Absalom. I would argue that this is actually David once again avoiding the responsibility that he has as Absalom's father and as the king of Israel, right? David was anointed king of Israel. Absalom wasn't. So for us to say, oh, look at David has such great respect for God that he wouldn't dare, because, hey, what if God wants Absalom to be king? Well, then he would have anointed him king. That's how it worked then, right? But he didn't do that. So David, he takes off. Like he runs away from another problem. And he does this time and time again. And it's really interesting because, Pastor Ryan talked about how the prophet Nathan, he comes and he has to bring this elephant to David's attention. And then in the aftermath of Absalom's death, right? And now, not that he's like a squeaky clean character, but in 2 Samuel chapter 19, you see David's commander come. Joab comes to him, and he has to address an elephant in the room because David sends his men out to go, hey, go, don't kill Absalom, but go, get him. We got to take care of this business right here. Now, Joab, that's why I say he's not squeaky clean, because he knew the king's command, and he's like, now let's kill him. And he kills him. Again, he's not a great dude there. But David is mourning, and Joab has to go to him and say, bro, you sent all of your guys out. Absalom is going to take over the kingdom. You've got guys that stepped up, and they're going to fight for your honor, for your place as king. And all you're focused on is the fact that Absalom died. He's like, bro, it's like your men snuck into the city in shame because of the way that you're acting. And if you don't get your crap together, you're not going to have anybody following you by nightfall. Right. And so Joab has to kind of address this. And that points out an area that can be challenging, especially go to a workplace kind of elephant situation. Right. There's a power differential here. Right. David's the king. Right. He's Joab's boss. Yeah. But yet Joab is like, no, look, we gotta address this elephant in the room. David, chronic, an elephant avoider. He wouldn't do it. Joab is like, no, we gotta address this thing. And then fortunately, David does come around. Otherwise, again, who knows even there what would have happened. Right. So yeah, he did not have a great track record with elephants. Well, and the reason why we say he wasn't being a good dad is because, the whole rape story is what Pastor Ryan had brought up. How he had married two different wives. One wife had a daughter and son, and one had a son. And this son crossed over, raped this daughter. And then Absalom was the older brother. And so dad did nothing. He avoided this whole situation. My kids are being inappropriate. I don't know how to handle it. So he just kind of runs away. And then that's when you get into this elephant multiplication of chaos and horrible things. And so, Absalom took revenge, killed his brother, ran away, came back. I mean, the whole story is pretty... It's a mess. It's a mess. But I think it's really cool though how, even a guy like King David can make so many mistakes and still, God is so gracious with us. He always wants us to come back to it, come back to him. And so I see these kind of stories and even just hearing you guys' the testimonies from, Pastor Josh or JB and, Rasika and Pastor Ryan.
we all have our own stories, hopefully not anything to that, like, affairs, rapes, murder.
Sons try to take over your empire. Kind of
Yeah, which I even found that part interesting, how Absalom did that. So how he tried to take over his dad's kingdom is he would sit at the gate and everybody would come to him, because they're coming to the king to go tell the problems. And he was kind of deceitful in that too, manipulation. And he's like, tell me your problems. And they would tell him, all the things that were, on their mind. And he'd be like, man, if I were king, I would fix everything.
But to lean into this parents, right? Lean into this parents. Absalom had a front row seat to David avoiding elephants, right? Like it's a possibility. Absalom is sitting there thinking, holy cow, dad has no idea how to run this kingdom. He's a good fighter, right? He's warrior kind of guy. But when it comes to this other arena, he's worthless.
Right, he looks away.
Right? He avoids conflict. He doesn't take care of justice, right? Which, as the king, this is his mandate to walk and carry out justice. And if I'm Absalom, I'm sitting there thinking, he's not doing that. If he's not going to do that, I will do that, right? Parents, what kind of a model are we for our children, right? When they get to adulthood, man, I don't know. I think there's some weight there. Bosses, again, it's not just in a family, not just in a marriage. Bosses, right? Do you model well to your employees how to handle and navigate conflict? I mean, we get into that more next week, right? But as a boss, do you address the elephants in the room? If you don't, but you're frustrated that your employees don't, you've not given them any sort of a model to actually approach those things. So I don't know. We have to step back and say, what kind of an example am I setting in this? Either in the way that I engage the elephants or the way that I avoid them. Both of those are an example. And the people around us are learning good things or not good things from us.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's one thing that Joshua and I have talked about too, even just like with our kids. When Joshua talks about counseling or next steps, I've seen it play out where sometimes, like, if mom and dad are fighting, they might pull a kid in. We're not talking about that. That's not good.
They're not the objective third party that I was talking about.
Right. Right.
Service.
But I do think that it is important for kids to see what healthy conflict does look like. So if we're having like a really heated, like we're just going at it, or maybe we're both like emotionally temperature checking ourselves and we're like, 105, we're running a little bit close to brain damage. We're not gonna invite our children into that kind of a space because we want it to be a safe environment. But it is something that we have been very intentional about. Like, hey, this is the conflict that Daddy and I are having when we're both calm. But that's another rule that we have when we fight. We never raise our voices because that's something that we never wanted to do with our children, because we don't want to teach them that when you get like super, super mad, you scream at somebody's face. Let's stay calm. And if anything, let's bring our volume even lower, because then they have to lean in to listen.
You whisper. They really got to pay attention.
What's Daddy gonna do? Oh my gosh. Versus yelling, because then they get reactive too.
Which I don't nail all the time. There are times when I raise my voice. No, I don't know that. I mean, you could.
Yeah.
Like if I did with you, I don't do a great job of that sometimes with my kids. That's still an area of learning and growth for me.
But I think honestly, just the fact that we have like so many, the volume there is naturally kind of loud. So there's that too. But anyway, I do think like if you're looking at this model of, King David and what he modeled to his sons, and his son, he modeled to avoid all these kind of hard conflicts. And we don't really want to do that. We want to dive into those conflicts. One of the things that I was saying we've tried to do, and we're still learning how to do, is bring our children into those, not because we want them to choose a side, but because we want them to just see, hey, Daddy's upset about this, and I'm upset about this, and we're working through it. Or after the conflict is done, we'll kind of explain to them, this is how we handled it. This is what we did badly in. This is what we could do better in. And I think it's been really cool because like our older children, we're really just kind of inviting them into some of those spaces. Again, not to get feedback or not for them to be our third party, but for them to see when mom and dad are emotionally healthy as we can be. We're always going to be working towards that. And when they address an elephant in the room and they're having a conflict, they see all of these tools that we're utilizing, and then they see what resolve looks like. Because I think so often we get stuck, like what Pastor Ryan was saying in his zones. He talks about a zone A, a zone B, and then a zone C. I think it's so often that we don't get to that resolve, that kind of that end letter of finding, what does resolution look like? And I think for our kids, it's so important for them to see that, because, growing up, my parents, they would have their arguments and stuff, but I don't know if I ever saw it full circle, And I know for us, we tried to hide everything, but we don't want our kids to think that we never have conflict.
Well, no, I mean, for one, I think it can give kids an unrealistic expectation for marriage, right? If they never see mom and dad engage in any sort of conflict, I think that can give them an unrealistic expectation for marriage, that conflict doesn't happen in a good marriage, right? Or they know, but we never model to them how to navigate it. Where are they going to learn that? Right? Like if we're not giving them the tools to be able to enter into conflict, where are they going to learn it?
Yeah. And that's where I think maybe if we want to talk about fix and listen support.
Yeah, where are we at? Where are we at time-wise? We got like 12 minutes.
So we'll wrap up with fix it, listen, support.
Well, because this was actually birthed out of an elephant.
Yes.
So we had, like, in the first couple of years of marriage, we had a pretty long history, before getting married. Like, just we knew each other as kids, and I think that set us up really well. But one of the things that proved to be an ongoing source of frustration in the early years of marriage is, let's say Nicole would come to me after work, and there's some situation with a work coworker or something like that, and she would be just talking about the frustration. And I'd say, here's what you do. Like, I mean, I'd give her some really, really good advice. And she would leave the conversation more frustrated than she came into it.
Yeah, I would feel just so deflated. I'm like, I'm bringing you something that I feel so overwhelmed with and so hurt with and so frustrated with. And then you're telling me all the things that I can do to make it better because clearly you're still failing and sucking at all these things. I don't know.
So we got in this cycle, and again, just the frustration level would grow. And I'm like, what's the problem? Like, can't you see how good my advice is?
And I'd be like, and you're not hearing me. You don't understand. Why are you being this way?
So we still, the origins of this are a little bit ambiguous. We didn't come up with it. We kind of packaged it in a certain way, and we've found a way that it works well for us.
Yeah, we keep finding tools in all these marriage counsel, all these, weekends to remember, things like that. We just like, that's a good tool. That's a good tool. Because again, you're going to build a much better house when you've got like the whole
lot of tools,
the whole thing.
So from this place of kind of ongoing frustration, again, our elephant in the room, we had to figure out what's going on here. Like, how is it that we are continually, frustrated with each other, right? Yeah, because she'd come to me frustrated with work, and she'd leave frustrated with me. Now I'm frustrated with her because she's not taking my advice, which would solve all of her problems.
Right.
And round and round it goes.
Right. So then we realized what I needed really in that space was I just need to listen. I really just need somebody to hear what I'm saying, go with me in one sense to the dark place of, feeling frustrated and sad and hurt, betrayed, all of the emotions. Let me experience all of the emotion. And this is where I want you. Yeah, there we go. I was singing this hand.
Oh, okay.
Hold my hand, go with me. It's okay, So that's listen. Fix it is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, listen is almost more of like if she comes to me and she's frustrated, I say, and this is actually the way that it plays out when we're doing it right. And we forget sometimes, right? She'll come to me, I can tell, hey, there's it's kind of an emotionally charged situation. So I will ask before we even get into it, is this a listen? Is this a fix it? Or is this a support? Again, listen, like she just said, that's kind of a, hey, she needs to be able to vent. She needs someone to just listen actively, right? Which fortunately for all of us, that's a learnable skill, right? We actively listen. We're still engaged, right? But I can tell the fix it part of my brain to just, sleep for a while.
Take a
right?
bench.
He's not in the game.
Right.
So that's listen. You said fix it. That's
pretty self-explanatory. Like, hey, I'm in a good place. Because sometimes I'll tell him that. He'll ask me, is this a listen, fix it, or support? And I say, fix it, baby. I'm ready. Give it to me. I need the solutions, all the things. Tell me what you think I should do. Which that's great. And then support, that's kind of a third element to this that we developed along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot later.
Is like I don't need somebody who's just listening, like here's a rock I'm talking to, which is cool, but like I need somebody to be like, man, if I were in your shoes, I would feel the same way.
It's far more of an empathetic kind of approach. The way that we've described it in other conversations is, right, like if a fix it is, hey, she's down in a dark pit, I throw her a rope and I drag her out of the pit, right? That's a fix it.
Yeah.
Support is, she's down in the bottom of this dark pit. I actually walk down into the dark pit with her, right, to try to say, hey man, if I were in this situation, what would I be feeling? Like, what would my outlook on this or on life be, right? And I try in some small way to understand what it is she's feeling, right? Not that, like, hey, she's depressed. All right, now I'm going to be depressed. But I try to understand, like if I had no motivation to do it, man, like how overwhelming would life seem in this moment? And I try to understand that, like I said, in some small way.
Right, and even in that, you can be like, man, I'm so sorry that you're walking this right now, because, like you see that too, and you can apply this really, not just in a marriage setting, but in friendships, you can apply it to really anything, like, I heard someone say like, hey, they had lost a baby, and someone else was trying to comfort them. Oh, well, like that's kind of a bummer that happened, but like at least you have 3 other kids that are still alive,
Not helpful. A support would be like, really all that needs to be said is like, I'm so sorry this happened. Sometimes it means you don't say anything at all.
That's it.
And you just sit and cry with that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's support.
Like
yeah.
it's that a deeper level of
Yeah.
of empathy than what just the listen. Again, listen, you're actively listening, but this is you're tapping more into the emotional aspect of things. Now, there's a caution, and I think we were just talking about this, I don't know, today or yesterday, something like that. The caution is you can't use this as an avoidance tool.
Right.
Okay? Like, so sometimes we have to be called out for bad behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes there's an elephant in the room that has to be addressed. And maybe I go to Nicole and I'm talking about a situation that maybe I'm upset about or whatever. And she responds, and maybe over the course of the conversation, she points out, hey, there are some things in me that are contributing to this particular situation. I can't say, well, hey, this is just a listen. Like, shut up and leave me alone. Like, no.
Can't do that. No,
because sometimes we have to get called out on kind of our contribution to some of those things. Yeah. Now, maybe she does that in that conversation. Maybe it's something to where afterwards, after I vented and gotten it all out, I had that with my counselor. It was awesome. It was very convicting. But we were just talking, and I was processing through kind of an elephant situation, and I'm venting, I'm going in, and he says, "Wow," he says, "that person sounds like they're almost as judgmental as you are," and I was like, "Oh crap!"
Right there. Yes. Self-awareness brought to my face.
Again, this is where we need those people that are in a sense going to hold up that mirror to us in some of those situations to see what it is that we're adding to the mix. And maybe we're 95% of it. What are we at time-wise?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so hey, there are a lot of different directions we could go with this, honestly, and we're not going to say that it's easy. Some elephants are going to be really challenging for you to engage, especially if this is something, childhood hurts, traumas, abuse. I mean, there are a lot of different things. We're not saying it's easy, right? And this is where, again, there are times where you have to bring in a third party, and like we said with the conversation with the kids, this isn't just grab one of your kids or grab your random neighbor. Be intentional. If you feel like you have an elephant situation and you need to bring a third party in, be wise with who you invite to the table. Bring in somebody that you love and respect, somebody that you feel like knows you to a certain extent, but also not, don't just bring in somebody who's gonna, quote unquote, be on your side. Right, because then we're kind of off right from the get-go, because now we're teaming up on somebody, and that's not great. Beauty of a counselor, they're objective, right? Like, I mean, they don't have a dog in this fight. Yeah. So be wise, again, especially for some of these more sensitive situations. Don't just grab anybody. Think through that, pray through that. But hopefully, kind of coming out of this message, we are all challenged to pay more attention to the elephants in the room, to pay attention to our contribution to the elephants in the room, to ask the questions, why am I avoiding this? What's that underlying fear? Kind of like, you were talking about that with the conflict. I don't want to lose this relationship. Right. Well, is it better to persist in a miserable relationship? Right. No, I don't think so. No. Let's step into the mess. Again, hopefully we've got some tools. We're not going to be able to figure it all out in a 1-hour podcast or a 40-minute message, but hopefully you got some of those gears turning. And there are a lot of other ways we could go, but we'll try to be disciplined with our time here. So, well, hey, this has been episode 60. It'll show up on the screen or on your device. As always, we encourage you to rate, review, share, subscribe. Every single person on earth is in some sort of relationship. So we would like to think that this could be beneficial. As we try to grow in our emotional health within relationships, we hope that the people around us could grow in this area as well. So if this is something that you found beneficial, again, just go ahead and share it. If you're listening to it, if you give us a review, if you think it's awesome, give us a 5-star. If you think it sucks, you don't have to give us a 5-star. Just tell us why. Email Josh@theradiantlife.church. If you hate it and you think it's total garbage, you can give us a crappy review. We would love to get your feedback on why you think that.
But I do love that. Like, if you do share it because it's helpful, that's good, because we do learn from each other. And as we're all learning how to navigate emotions and relationships and all these things, we are so much better together. Isolation, introvertedness, let's all work past our things and do it together. Yep,
that's good. Hey, appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Again, it was a privilege to have my lovely wife hanging out with us, and for our friends for letting us use their space. Yep. So, but we will plan to see you next time as we continue our series, ER.